Hello and welcome to the Tennessee Informer. I'm your host, Dave Vance. Our guest tonight is Richard Archie, West Tennessee Director of the TFA. Richard will be talking about the incredible sabotage brought about by the GOP Super-Majority to our Second Amendment rights in our General Assembly. Don't go anywhere. You don't want to miss this. If you have an announcement from a conservative organization that you'd like to have broadcast on the show, please send the information to tninformer.tv@gmail.com the Friday before the show. The Stewart County GOP will meet this Thursday, April 25th, 6:30 p.m. at the Stewart County Visitor Center. Our speaker will be candidate for State Senate in the 24th District, Charles Cooper. Before we get to Richard, we have a special report from Representative Rusty Grills. He represents Dyersburg, among other areas, and there were some incidents that went on this weekend in Dyersburg involving illegal immigration, and we have Rusty here to tell us all about it, and we appreciate you coming on such short notice, Rusty. So fill everybody in on what you saw this weekend, please.
Thanks, Dave, and thank you for all you do. I serve District 77, which is Dyer, Lake, and Obion counties. It consists of Dyersburg, Tiptonville, and over in the Union City, South Fulton area. I was just at home on Friday night, and I had just hung up with a school superintendent talking about some different issues that we, have going on throughout the legislative process. And I hung up with them, looked at the Facebook, and I saw that there were some people that were in Dyersburg unloading a like a cargo van. Not a cargo van, but a charter bus, excuse me. And I told my wife and girls, I said, let's run down there and see what's going on, because this could be something serious. You jumped in the truck and headed to Dyersburg. We got down there and pulled up and said, "What's going on here, fellas?" And no one spoke any English, so I saw some cops at the adjacent parking lot, went over and spoke to them, and kind of said, "What's up? What's going on here?" They didn't really have any idea either. So I said, "I'm going to put my wife and daughters, let them run in the mall to get them away from, whatever's going on here." So I let them out. And I went back over there, and they got the cops over there, and we started talking to the individuals. And what's going on here? Where are you from? What are you doing? Can we help you? And no one spoke any English. And then one of the police officers, one of the sergeants there for the Dyer County Sheriff's Department, was on the phone with an interpreter and asked a couple of questions. And the next thing you know, I said, "Are you legal? Are you legal?" We asked something about having papers, and they understood that. The next thing you know, they started speaking English, and then everybody pulled a visa out. They started pulling visas out. Well, at that time, there was more conversations. Where are you going? What's your objective here? We made out that they were going to Norfolk, Virginia, Virginia Beach, and North Carolina. That's where some of the directions that they said they were headed, and they were supposed to be meeting someone, but they never would tell us who they were meeting or where they were going to meet them, because apparently there was going to be some that were going to get off and go with someone else that was going to employ them this summer. That's what we kind of gathered. Then at that time, they just started to load up in the van shortly thereafter. So they got on the bus, and next thing you know, so we're out of here. We're going to go. There was nothing they had done that was necessarily illegal for the cops to detain them after they showed the visas and all those type of documents. Well, they said they were going to go on. They had to go about 2 hours. So they got on the bus and headed out towards, we understood them to be going up into Kentucky. Well, they got to 412 because a man that was there, one of our citizen heroes, if you will, was following them to make sure that they didn't just go to another place to start unloading. Now, let me go back and tell you this. If you're going to take a rest, or if you go and you're traveling, you don't stop, get out all of your luggage that's underneath the bus, okay?
Right.
That was one of the things that kind of triggered us. Like, this doesn't make sense. Just something doesn't smell right here. But anyhow, they threw everything back on the bus. They took off. They went towards Friendship on 412. Well, this man continued to follow them. As he followed them, to my understanding, they pulled over at the McDonald's in Bales, and they started to unload again there. And at that time, another vehicle, I believe it was a white Mercedes, is what he had told me, kind of blocked this guy in. He had called the police officers or the sheriff's department in Crockett County, and Crockett County Sheriff's Department responded extremely quick. Then they loaded back up and got back on the van or the bus and headed back towards Dyersburg area. They got to Dyersburg area. They kept trying to cut this guy off that was following them because he was just telling them. Well, they got to Dyersburg and they made a loop. They kept trying to cut this gentleman off back at Highway 78. They get off the 4-lane Highway 78, come back and get on the road, I-55 headed north. And at that time, I was like, something's just not right about this. I made a couple of calls to the Obion County Sheriff's Department, Union City Police Department, and the state troopers. He said, "Hey, this is what's going on." I believe our local sheriff reached out to Obion County Sheriff and talked to them. And I got to give kudos to the sheriff's departments. They seem to be on top of it. And when they got to Union City, I believe that there were some issues they had. They committed some type of infringement, I believe. Somebody was telling me that they had broken some law, or they had some lighting issues. Anyhow, so the police helped them with that, and it's my understanding they had a Spanish-speaking officer that actually could have a good conversation with them. There was no language barrier with them, and they understood that these guys actually had the proper documents, and they were in the country legally as far as the documents. I don't know what kind of documents they had, but there's no doubt about it that the people following this bus, there were two different instances where two different vans that were trying to cut them off, is my understanding. I believe they were Mercedes vans, like a church bus that seemed to be with them. And when the police showed up, they cut tail. Dave, I don't know what's going on here, but there's something more to the story than what we're able to tell you. I serve in the House. I've got 70,000 people I represent. I went to the border last year. We know that there's a crisis at the border. I believe it's a manufactured crisis by the Biden administration in some respects, because when I say manufactured, he may not be necessarily doing it, but he's not doing anything to stop it. All he's got to do is make a couple of phone calls to Mexico and say, "Hey guys, we're done. Stop this. Remain in Mexico," just like Trump did. When President Trump said, "Stay down there," that stopped it. And we can do the same thing. Now, I'm of the persuasion, if you want to come to America, we want you to come to America. We want you to come through a wide gate where we're going to have tall fences. And I've said that over and over again. Come to America, do it the legal way, do it the right way, because there's many a person that's set in line for years trying to do things the right way, and it's not fair to step on the heads of those individuals just so they can cheat the system. I hope that gives you a little bit of insight to what we just went through this past weekend at Dyersburg.
Couple quick questions. Were they mostly male, and were they younger, older? What kind of mix was there?
They were all male. I would say I'm 42. They were probably my age or younger, and there was no females with them.
Okay.
I asked where they were from. They said they were all from Mexico.
Okay. What about the bus and the vehicles following the bus, trying to keep that guy from following them? Or did they have what was their license plate? Was it Tennessee, Texas? Where was it from?
No, they were not Tennessee license plates. I believe I'm not sure. Someone sent those in a picture of them, but I can't remember what that is off the top of my head, Dave.
Okay. And the charter buses were not a name that we would recognize. They were not. And they were not. I think we were talking earlier. You said they didn't really look like they were in that great a shape. So
it wasn't something that you felt like you would want to. Obviously, you see the picture there, red and white. It's not something that was looked like it was well kept. Now, it may have just been weather worn or dirty. It may have just needed a good washing, but it was definitely not something that I would want to take off from here to Orlando on. I can tell you that.
Right, and we don't know what happened after they left Union City. We don't know if they stayed at Union City or if they kept going to Kentucky or wherever.
Yeah, that's right. We don't know what happened. We don't know where they went, but it's my understanding that before I got to Dyersburg, when I saw it, like I said, I just saw it on Facebook and just jumped in the vehicle and ran down there. There seemed to be a larger group. I saw a picture, original picture, or the first picture that was taken, and it seemed to be a little bit larger group than there was whenever I got there.
So has the state not put out any kind of guidance for what you guys are supposed, what the county should do when they see these people coming in from down south or wherever? Is there no plan?
I don't know if the county, what the team of directors or the Sheriff's Association or Chiefs Association or what they have as far as the normal protocol. I do believe that they've had some conversation. I can't imagine them not. But we do need to make sure that we bring awareness to this So whenever someone comes into our state and they have suspicious activities, and we understand this, like 4 weeks ago, and 2 illegals were busted on I-40 carrying 85 pounds of fentanyl. That's enough fentanyl to kill everybody in Kentucky, Tennessee, and Mississippi. It's a problem, okay?
Yeah.
Let's not fool ourselves. So yeah, we need to make sure we have the right protocols in place, and that we know how to transmit suspects from maybe potential suspects from county to county to county to make sure that they're not unloading illegal immigrants here. But like I said originally, come to America, do it the right way, and we'll welcome you. But do it the wrong way, you need to go.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Well, hey, thank you for coming on, especially such short notice, and letting us know about this. And I hope that our state in the very near future comes up with something they can do to make illegal aliens as unwelcome as possible in our state. You have a good night, and thanks again.
Look, tomorrow, I think we're going to bill that we're going to see in finance tomorrow that we put on the calendar this afternoon in session that Representative Monty Fritz has that may address some of this. So, timing's everything, and maybe this past weekend was good timing to bring a little light to the situation.
Hope so. I look forward to hearing about that one.
Thank you. God bless.
Hey, you too. Thanks for all you do. Appreciate you. Before we bring Richard on, here's a little video that he released just the other day. Now, 19th of April, this past Friday, was the 249th anniversary of the Battle of Lexington Concord. And Richard put this little video together. I think everybody needs to hear this. So we're going to go on with the video, and then we'll bring Richard on.
Today is April 19th, Patriots Day. It is not recognized by our government, state or federal. Ralph Waldo Emerson in his Concord hymn memorialized the event, but alas, his fear that the sacrifice of blood on our behalf would be forgotten has come true. In his words, by the rude bridge that arched the flood, their flag to April's breeze unfurled, here once the embattled farmers stood and fired the shot heard round the world. The foe long since in silence slept, alike the conqueror silent sleeps, and time the ruined bridge has swept down the dark stream which seaward creeps. On this green bank by this soft stream, we set today a votive stone, that memory may their deed redeem, when like our sires, our sons are gone. Spirit that made those heroes dare to die and leave our children free, bid time and nature gently spare the shaft we raise to them and thee. I do not know who wrote these words, but they speak to me of those men who dared to die on our behalf. The most terrifying force of death comes from the hands of men who wanted to be left alone. They try so very hard to mind their own business and provide for themselves and those they love. They resist every impulse to fight back, knowing the forced and permanent change of life that will come from it. They know that the moment they fight back, their lives as they have lived them are over. The moment the men who wanted to be left alone are forced to fight back, it is a form of suicide. They are literally killing off who they used to be, which is why, when forced to take up violence, these men who wanted to be left alone fight with unholy vengeance against those who murdered their former lives. They fight with raw hate and a drive that cannot be fathomed by those who are merely play acting at politics and terror. True terror will arrive at these people's door, and they will cry, scream, and beg for mercy, but it will fall upon the deaf ears of the men who just wanted to be left alone.
Now to Richard in the flesh. Thanks for being with us. Let's hear about the cold, hard truth about our General Assembly and their alleged support for the Second Amendment. But first, hey, thank you for doing that video. You're right. It's a shame that neither our country or our state, the 19th of April should be a national holiday. Maybe if nothing else, we can have a holiday in Tennessee next year on the 19th of April.
Well, you would hope so. I mean, we did memorialize Juneteenth in Texas, so, you might want to take another 19th day and something as important as Lexington and Concord.
Good point.
Yeah. So anyway, what's going on at the General Assembly? Well, not a lot. A couple of things I want to tell you about. One of the most important was the constitutional amendment that we had. Jay Reedy carried it in the House. It was House Joint Resolution 0038, and John Stevens had it over in the Senate, Senate Joint Resolution 904. I went up and testified on that bill in the Senate Judiciary Committee, and Todd Gardenhire, who is the chairman of that, basically said, I don't ever vote for these things, but we gave him enough impetus and showed him enough facts that when it came to the end of it, after I testified and after Senator Stevens presented his viewpoint on it, Gardenhire came out and he said, I characteristically don't vote for this stuff, and I told you that at the front end, but I'm going to vote, and I'm going to vote first, and I'm going to vote aye. And we wound up with all 7 of the Republicans on the Senate Judiciary Committee voting in favor of that bill. Now, the next week, it was read 3 times, and all of them have to be read 3 times after they're referred from the committee. And so finally, they carried it to the floor, and every Republican senator, including the lieutenant governor, voted in favor of that bill. And it was engrossed and sent over to the House. The next week, Jay Reedy and I were talking that morning, because I've been fighting and working on this for a lot of years, and so has Jay. And while we were on the phone, he said, what? And he was approached by another individual from the committee that was going to the committee that had a separate constitutional amendment, and their bills were taken off notice. They weren't told about it. They weren't asked about it. They had no chance to do anything about it. They just said, we're not going to hear your bills. And so out of all the different constitutional amendments that were up, only one was considered. We, of course, reached out to the powers that be at that point. And what we were told at the end of it, well, they just didn't. The last 2 times when we had 4 constitutional amendments, people fussed about having that many on there at the end of the ballot. And, it's just a little hard. We didn't want to invoke voter fatigue. And so they decided this year they'd just cut it back to 3.
Who's they? Who is they?
Well, the response that I got was from the Secretary of State, that said, people are just tired of having too many. And by the way, it could, in fact, cost the state more money if putting that last constitutional amendment on the ballot might make it go to 2 pages. They might have to spend more dollars on postage to mail out the absentee ballots, and the people who were filling out absentee ballots might have to spend more money to mail them back. Now, I don't know about you, but I mail a lot of stuff. And when I go to the post office, if it'll fit in an envelope, couple, 3, 4 pages, if I write to my sister or somebody like that, they don't charge me any more money than that. You've got to get on up and weigh something. So 2 pieces of paper are not going to be enough to make it cost more money. So I think basically across the board, those folks who have the ability to throttle things like this just didn't want to see that come up for the people to actually make the choice on. And it would wait for 2 years. I mean, you have to pass it this year, and then you have to come back and pass it next year with a 2/3 majority. And then it goes on the ballot in 2026. And now, the way it's done, it can't possibly come back up for consideration until 2030. Now, across the board, if you look at the video of the Senate Judiciary Committee, even Todd Gardenhire agrees, said, you're right, this is a Jim Crow law, and we need to get that off our books. And so I can't figure how anybody would want to keep a racist piece of legislation that was fostered on the people of Tennessee in 1870 at the end of the Civil War to make sure that the freed black slaves didn't have the opportunity to bear firearms to withstand the Night Riders and the KKK. I just don't get why we weren't allowed to put that up, because if we matched what they did in 2018 and 2022, they each had 4 constitutional amendments on those ballots. But I guess we're just going to wear the voters out with adding 1 more this time.
Well, I would say that, we really don't want stupid people voting anyway. So if 4 would fatigue you, I didn't want you to vote for it, number 1. Number 2, it would seem to me that Trey Too Many Hargett 3 might have been a good number to limit himself to at Bonnaroo, but I don't think he has any business limiting our constitutional amendments on the ballot. That just doesn't seem right to me. Do we have any recourse?
We do not. We have, I talked to them possibly about bringing it back to the floor through the rule that they've got up there. If you got enough people sign on and come back, but there's no stomach for it. Nobody's interested in it. And right here at the time of people getting ready to go start asking for money and your votes again, I think it's imperative to know that the people on the Finance Committee, that's the one where they weren't allowed to bring the bill up on notice.
Who's the chair?
Patsy Hazelwood's the chair of that committee. Now, do I think that she did that of her own volition? I do not. I think that she was told by somebody in more of a power of authority, then she's got to make that decision. But for whatever reason, and whoever did it, it's not on the ballot. And so therefore, like I said, it's dead until 2030. Now, I want the people to understand that in 2010, the Supreme Court of the United States incorporated the Second Amendment against the states through the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. By doing that, what they did was they wrapped the chains of the Constitution around the state, just like they are for the federal government. Because people need to understand that the Constitution doesn't limit us, our rights. It limits what government can take away from us and what they can do to us. And so when they incorporated the Second Amendment against the states through the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment, that negated the constitutional change that they made in 1870 that we were trying to get off in the first place. And what that basically says is that the legislature shall have power by law to regulate the wearing of arms with a view to prevent crime. Dave, you know me, I've been walking up and down the halls up there for the last 25 years, and I have never heard anybody come in there and say, well, if you pass this law, it's going to cause more crime. What I have heard them say was, if you pass this law, it might be dangerous for law enforcement if we give you more of your rights back and allow you to enjoy the rights and privileges as enumerated in the Constitution of the United States and the state of Tennessee. I don't necessarily think that's their job to do, and we'll talk about that a little later. But they've killed that constitutional amendment, and I think the people ought to be incensed about that because of all the issues that they're going to have on the Constitution. That was the only one that actually dealt with the constitutional misstep. I mean, they got one that's talking about, well, you got to have bail, but that could have been treated statutorily. Right. I mean, if you remember, go back to when we were fighting against the income tax. That first year after we defeated that over there in legislation, it got killed in the House and the Senate because so many people were honking horns and jumping up and down and squalling about it. And them boys knew that when they signed it, died and got out, they wasn't going to get reelected if they passed that year. They didn't pass a constitutional amendment right then. They waited about 6 or 7 years before it came up to put a constitutional amendment on. And by the way, so that everybody understands and knows, do you remember the constitutional amendment for the federal Constitution that they put on, turned around about 3 years and took back off? That would be prohibition. That was a constitutional amendment. And they saw how bad that was, and they turned around and pulled it back off next round, right? So a constitutional amendment would not mean that down the road, another group of people, if enough folks didn't want whatever you did then, wanted to change that, they'd have the opportunity. It simply looks to me like they did not want to do away with that Jim Crow law on our books that's been there since 1870, in which, by the way, in 1871, in Andrews v. State, they called it unconstitutional. And so if the federal group, and there you go. If you read this is actually from Heller, and it says in Andrews v. State, the Tennessee Supreme Court likewise held that a statute that forbade open carrying of pistols publicly or privately without regard to time or place or circumstance. And what it did, this is from 50 Tennessee, and that's the Andrews v. State deal in 1871, violated the state constitutional provision which the court equated to at that point. Basically what they call that is our Second Amendment analog, right? That's what they talk about. Okay. That was so, even though the state did not deny carrying of long guns at the time. Now, that's important that we know that. In 1871, it was illegal to carry a handgun in Tennessee, but it was not illegal, because that's what that case was about. Andrews was a gentleman from up here in Gibson County, and when he came back from the war, he had some squatters on his place, and he tried to move them off, and they said, no, we're not, y'all lost the war. And so he carried his handgun with him to evict the people, and they arrested him because at that time in 1870, they put the intent to go armed clause on there and said that no person could carry a handgun with the intent to go armed. So they arrested him, and he challenged it and went up to the appellate court, and they said, no, we're going to agree with the people over in Gibson County. And he carried it all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, wait a minute, no, that's not right. We don't hold that you can't carry a firearm for your own self-protection. Now, sensitive places, you can't carry them in schools, maybe not in churches. You can carry your gun to church, but not in church. Not, except that if you look back in early Tennessee history, they required people who went to church to carry their guns with them. We forget about that in our ancient history. But what is that? That's in that historical tradition that Bruin talks about, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. Well, I think a lot of people are going armed in church even now.
Yeah. Well, and we've had to change the laws in Tennessee, because if you look at what we've had in 1796, we ratified the original Constitution, and the Second Amendment analog at that point said the free men of this state have the right to keep and to bear arms for their common defense. There wasn't none of that malarkey in there about however the legislature has got any power to do a thing, because if I understand correctly what Article 1, Section 1 of our Constitution says, is all power is inherent in the people, and all governments are founded on their authority and instituted for their peace, safety, and happiness. For the advancement of those ends, they have at all times an unalienable and indefeasible right to alter, reform, or abolish the government in such manner as they may think proper. I don't see anything in that talking about the legislature telling me what I can or can't do. They work for us, and they're supposed to. They take an oath that says they'll vote without favor, affection, partiality, or prejudice, and that they will not assent to any vote, bill, resolution, or thing whatever which would appear to them injurious to the people's ability to enjoy the rights and privileges enumerated in the Declaration of Rights. So if our original analog said the free men of this state have the right to keep and to bear arms for their common defense, why would we think that's a bad thing? Why would you think that the legislature should have to have power to do anything about that? And when they incorporated the Second Amendment against the states through the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment in 2010, by the way, it negated and made that codicil on our Constitution moot. But we could not get the General Assembly to allow that, to even put it to a vote of the people. And I'm not happy about that situation.
Well, nobody should be.
That's just one. Now,
before you go to the next one, I want to say something. We just talked about the problem with the Fed-led invasion. It's almost as if our legislature lives in another world. I mean, they're not going to protect us. There's not enough police to protect us. It should be, I would think they would want their citizens armed with what's going on in our country. And they're not going to stop them from coming into Tennessee, apparently. They haven't really, other than this effort that was made this weekend, no effort for the states other than lawsuits, which are total BS. No positive action, yet they won't allow us to defend ourselves.
Well, we had a couple of bills that were up, and I was going to tell you about the one. You talk about the shenanigans at the General Assembly. Clay Doggett had a bill that he ran last year, or actually 2 years ago, and then he put it back up this time, that simply said that the Second Amendment is a civil right. Okay? Now, if in McDonald v. City of Chicago, they said that they incorporated the Second Amendment against the states through the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment, that means it's a civil right. And by the way, if you look at what the Attorney General said in the Beeler case 2 years ago, and it came to fruition when Jonathan Skrmetti came in and took over as Attorney General. He declined to defend the state against, as they said in the agreed order, the challenged scheme of Tennessee denying 18-year-olds the ability to possess a handgun or to perfect a permit to carry a handgun for their own protection. He admitted, and it says in the agreed order, that that was a violation of the 2nd and 14th Amendments. Now, that he signed his name to that, so that means that the Attorney General, the guy in Tennessee that's supposed to be the top dog for deciding what's constitutional and what's not, agreed that that was a civil right violation, is what it was, and he would not defend the state against it. And we're under orders from the court right now to allow 18-year-olds to carry handguns and to perfect permits. But you have not seen that codified in the General Assembly to date. We've had 2 different bills that tried to do that, and both of them looked like, well, the one last year that Rusty and Chris had got amended to, it was a nothing burger. They did finally leave the 18-year-old stuff in there, but it happened right before, it was coming up right before the Covenant shooting, and so they dropped everything that had to do with firearms. And so it's been sitting in finance over there, amended down to just allowing 18-year-olds to carry, and they wouldn't even pick it up and run that this year. And I don't know why, because it's just sitting in finance. And we contacted the Senate sponsor and asked him to do that, and I hadn't heard back from him on it. So anyway, with that being said, there was another bill that came up that actually went the same day that I testified in the Senate Judiciary Committee on the constitutional amendment. I testified on the bill that would make the Second Amendment a civil right in Tennessee. And the sponsor said, I won't do near as good a job of that as Archie will. Let's just let him go ahead and present the bill. So all of a sudden, I'm not just testifying, but I'm actually presenting the bill, which is okay. And so I went through the whole thing and said, hey, if the Supreme Court of the United States says it's a civil right, I would think that'd be good enough for Tennessee. And so all we were trying to do at that point is say any person that is a taxpayer-paid employee who denies an individual their ability to enjoy the rights and privileges of the Second Amendment as enumerated in the Constitution of the federal government of the state of Tennessee would be guilty of official oppression. Okay?
Right.
It was not something that we were trying to hold to the General Assembly or to the legislators, because they can't be sued for such stuff.
Right.
They have total immunity for their testimony that they give and for the speeches that they give and for the votes that they give. It's Article 2, Section 13. You can't arrest them for driving 100 miles down the road while they're in session, much less for what they say in the House. But that was what was presented to the members, would be a problem that TFA would sue them if they voted in a way that we didn't like. And when that bill was presented, it didn't even get a second.
Well,
Don
who said
White
that? Who said that?
Huh?
Who made that claim?
Well, John Stevens made that claim to me standing at the bar with Adam Lowe and the lobbyist for the NRA. He said, no, we can't have that because you'll be able to sue us. And he pointed at Adam Lowe and said, they'll be able to sue you. Well, we presented a case for it that's not true and that those words were unfounded, but it didn't do us any good.
Isn't he a lawyer?
Yes, he is.
Okay. That's the current senator for 24th District, by the way.
That's correct. And he is the attorney that's on the Senate Judiciary Committee. But when that bill got presented, every one of them that were sitting there had an opportunity to give that bill a second and to bring it up for consideration, and it fell on deaf ears. Dawn White was the only one. She made the motion, and nobody else would second it, so it died right there. So the Senate looks good that they all voted for the constitutional amendment, but they had an opportunity on a statute to put it into place, and they refused to even give it a second to talk about it. Kind of reminds me of last year or 2 years ago when we tried to run that same bill, they just sent it to summer study. And you know what that is? That's dumping it off in the ditch so that it'll never be seen again. It's a real nice word for killing a bill. They haven't talked about it in the summer since then, and they never do, but that's what they do. Oh, we're going to send that to summer study because we're not sure that we understand it. Right. So those two things have already occurred at the General Assembly. Now, we got another bill that's coming up that I'm actually going to go testify on tomorrow that's very similar to what Clay and Rusty ran last year in their 1005. Here are the three things that it does. Excuse me. It would take away the criminal aspect of carrying a firearm. In other words, do away with the intent to go armed clause from the 1870s, which is purely and simply a Jim Crow law, because why would anybody strap on a firearm and carry it out their front door? Did they do that? Oh, I didn't mean to bring this rifle with me, or that firearm or that handgun sitting in my holster. I just didn't mean it. It fell on my hip as I was getting ready to go to work. How ludicrous is that?
And this is 3 years after Bill Lee swears he gave us constitutional carry.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
And by the way, and you've seen it, and I think a lot of people have seen the graphic that we put up a lot of times that show that long guns are permissible in 42 states in the United States as a right. You don't have to have a permit. You can pick them up and carry them. Now, you can't carry them a lot of places, don't get me wrong. But if your truck breaks down and you need to walk back to the house with it, and you don't want to leave your firearm in the truck, get the window broken, get it stole, and you don't want to leave that high dollar ammunition costing you $60 a box now, if you pick that firearm up, that long gun, and your box of ammunition, you're a criminal if you step outside that truck. Now, don't get me wrong, in 2014, the General Assembly voted to say, yeah, I'll tell you what you can do. If you can possess that long gun, you can stick it in the seat next to you and you can stuff her full, and that's fine. Now, do you think that if you've got a loaded firearm in your car and something happened, you wouldn't use it for your self-protection? But the General Assembly is going to say it's okay, but the second you open that door, now you're a criminal. What kind of fall is that? It just doesn't make sense. But anyway, as we were running that bill last year that did these three things, let me get them all three. I tend to run around. It was going to do away with the criminal aspect of carrying a firearm. Number two, it was going to allow long guns into the permissible class of weapons in the state of Tennessee. And number three, it was going to comport with the federal court's order that you allow 18-year-olds to possess handguns and to perfect a permit to do so. The director of the TBI came in and testified, as well as did the commissioner of the Department of Safety and the governor's spokesperson, and they all came in and said they were philosophically opposed to allowing us to do that. And the director of the TBI said that he had done a deep dive into Heller and Bruin, and those cases were just about handguns. Why, they didn't have anything to do with rifles at all. And if the Second Amendment protected any firearms, it was handguns, and if it protected any long gun, it would have to be muskets, because that's what they had at the ratification time. Now, I want to read you, and you can put up that second slide that I've got. From Heller, it talks about that very thing. And Scalia said, some have made the argument, bordering on the frivolous, that only those arms in existence in the 18th century are protected by the Second Amendment. We do not interpret constitutional rights that way. Just as the First Amendment protects modern forms of communication and the Fourth Amendment applies to modern forms of search, the Second Amendment extends prima facie to all instruments that constitute bearable arms, even those that were not in existence at the time of the founding. And that's from District of Columbia v. Heller in 2008. So if, in fact, the director of the TBI did a deep dive and read through it, do you think he might have stumbled across that paragraph?
I would have thought he would.
Yeah, I kind of would have too. But what he said was that he understands it better than us. Now, I was watching him as he testified. He had a cell phone and he had something that looked like an iPad. So We wasn't making him use parchment and quill pens and getting an answer from back home by carrier pigeon while he was doing that. And it comports exactly with what Heller said. We don't treat modern forms of communication that way. They're covered by the First Amendment. But the Second Amendment, he thinks that we got to go all the way back to 1791. And by the way, they had repeating shotguns and they had repeating rifles at that time. The Pukul gun, there were a lot of different things that would fire more than once. And so this, just muskets is untrue. And I think that the director knows that it's not so. And if he doesn't, we need another director.
I agree.
So,
and he works for the governor. The director and the Department of Safety head work for the governor. And so that's part of the executive branch.
That's correct. They work for the governor. And they are not elected officials. They are, in fact, unelected bureaucrats that have more to do, because what they do is they come up there and they testify. And what do we call people who come up there and work against something or work for something?
Lobbyists.
90% of the time, we call them lobbyists. That's correct. Now, who pays those lobbyists?
In this case, we pay
those lobbyists.
Yeah.
And they're taking my tax money to deny me my rights. I don't think that should be allowed. I think that flies in the face of everything that we stand for as a republic. To have your government try to do away with your rights, especially those that the Constitution called unalienable and indefeasible. An unalienable right is one that the government can't take away from you. And an indefeasible right is one that you can't give away. And these are those rights that are enshrined in our Declaration of Rights. And we're allowing people that we pay to come in and to try to put their thumb on the scale. By the way, you need to understand, we have 3 divisions of government in the state of Tennessee. Article 2, Section 1 says we got 3. It's the legislative, executive, and judiciary. And Article 2 Section 2 under Article 2 says that no department shall exercise any of the powers that belong to the other unless they're expressly spoken about in the Constitution. And I can promise there ain't nowhere it says you can go in there and lobby against the citizens' rights. So if constitutionally they're not allowed to do that, then why do we as citizens allow that to happen? And the reason of it is because a lot of the legislators up there think all the Department of Safety and all the TBI are just the greatest thing in the world. But they work for us. The governor's only charge is to faithfully enforce the laws of the state. He can from time to time, and it says that in Article 3, Section 10. Article 3, Section 11 says he can from time to time make recommendations to the legislature on points that he thinks are important. But the only thing he can do is say yes or no once they pass legislation. He can either sign it or veto it or let it lay on the table and become law, or let it lay on the table if it's late enough and kill it. But what he can't do is he can't pass those laws. That's not his job. And so therefore it doesn't belong to the people that work underneath his direction at his pleasure, as it says.
And the other thing that happens, the legislators carry a lot of legislation for the governor. If the governor wants to write legislation, then he should run to be a legislator. I think it's ridiculous that I think it's probably, is it an overstatement to say that every year, and it's not just this governor, probably anywhere from 50 to 70 bills every year that the administration's put out. Is that a reasonable estimate of what they put out?
Yeah, I think that's probably true, and a lot of them don't get passed, kind of like the vouchers.
Yeah, that did get beat, and I was glad to see that got beat. But, I just think it's wrong for the governor to push that much legislation. If we had wanted a strong governor, our Constitution would have set one up, and it would have said he can submit whatever he wants. But it made it pretty clear that whatever he submitted was supposed to be kind of like an exception, not a whole slew of bills every year.
Yeah. When it says from time to time, as he finds expedient, That don't seem to me like to be a steady torrent running off top of the hill down on top of everybody's head.
Yeah.
Now, the other thing that you just referenced a second ago, he is, in fact, by constitutional law and the intent of our founders in the state, the weakest governor in the nation.
Yep.
Because if he vetoes the bill, all it takes is the same number of people to override his veto that passed it originally.
Yep.
So does that really give him much veto power?
Nope. Nope.
I can remember in 2010 when we passed guns in parks and guns in bars, the Democrat governor vetoed both those bills. I do remember that the person who became Speaker of the House later on voted with the governor both times, but it failed, and those vetoes were overridden. And we overrode the veto on the guns and bars twice, 2 years in a row, because a Chancery Court in Nashville said, well, we don't understand exactly what a bar is, and so I'm fixing to set this aside and say that it's, void for vagueness, and so we can't really tell what that is, and so we just simply came back the next year and did a better definition of defining what a bar was. We passed the law again, and the governor vetoed it again, and we overrode the veto again. So it's not like his veto really carries that much weight. What you have to understand, in the state of Tennessee, they wanted legislation passed to come from the people that were closest to the people that it talks about being in charge. And that's the representatives, because they get to run every 2 years. Now, the Senate's on a 4-year deal, staggered cycle and all that, and that's to keep us from just going hog wild and pig crazy and changing everything at one fell swoop. But what happens is, if you mess up too bad, the people in your district will unelect you as House members.
Yep.
And so that's the reason that Tennessee was set up to be strongest for the people of any state in the Union. If you remember, going back to what Thomas Jefferson said, the way it was all laid out and the way it was done, he said, this is the least imperfect and the most Republican, not speaking about a party, because that wasn't a party at the time.
Right.
But he's talking about a form of government where you've got a written set of rules that you have to go by for governance, that you can't just make this stuff up willy-nilly because you want to, and feelings don't have anything to do. It's got to be couched in the Constitution. Kind of like Bruin says, if in fact your activity implicates the Second Amendment, then the burden shifts instantly to government to approve that their infringement comports with historical tradition of firearms regulations that were on the books at the time of the founding. It also says that not all history is equal. That stuff that happened way back in is more important, because that's when the people who had skin in the game deciding to throw off a tyrannical government had just got through shooting the government.
Yep.
To win their liberty and freedom. And that kind of goes back to what we talked about at the very first end. When I put that together about the Concord hymn, it just aggravates me that we never see that brought up by anybody in our government in the state of Tennessee ever. And Tennessee, of course, is the patron state of shooting stuff, as a lot of people know. John Sevier, Coffee, Carroll, Houston, Crockett, all these people that made history, that furthered liberty by being volunteers and bringing their own weapons. Now, I want to further talk about what laws have been in the state of Tennessee. I said earlier that there was never a statute in place until 1989 that made it a crime to carry a firearm. Let's put that last slide up. This comes from, and I went to Nashville this year, and Clay Doggett's young lady that works in his office did 99% of the work. I have to give her credit. She went up there and helped dig through all this stuff and got me what I was looking for. But we looked through every iteration of any rule that said you couldn't carry a firearm in the state of Tennessee. This is the last one that I found that wasn't changed. This is from 1987. Any person who shall carry in any manner whatever with the intent to go armed, any razor, dirk, bowie knife, or other knife of like form, shape, or size, sword, cane, ice pick, slingshot. Get that slingshot. A blackjack, a brass knuckles, Spanish stiletto, or a fountain pen pistol or gun or like instrument containing a firing pin capable of shooting tear gas or a pistol cartridge or any pistol or revolver of any kind, whatever, except the Army or Navy pistol, which shall be carried openly in the hand. Did you realize that until 1987, we actually had constitutional carry? Any person that could possess that handgun, as long as he kept it in his mitt, could carry it. You don't hear about that much, but it was the fact. Or any other dangerous weapon shall be guilty of a misdemeanor. If they're going to write down slingshots, don't you think they would have said something about rifles and shotguns if they intended for you not to carry them?
Would think.
All right, so we can prove that there was never, and we go back to the Heller case and the Andrews v. State case that say specifically that there was no stricture on carrying long guns in Tennessee in 1871. Right. And literally it called it unconstitutional to deny a person the ability to carry a pistol. But nobody in our General Assembly will recognize that or bring it up for discussion. But I can promise you tomorrow, I'm going to bring it up for discussion because I'm testifying in the House on the new bill that it's 2082 by Monty Fritz, and it does exactly the same thing that Chris and Rusty's bill did last year. It takes away the criminal aspect, does away with the intent to go armed. It allows long guns into the permissible class of weapons, and it also codifies the federal court order to allow 18-year-olds to possess handguns and to carry or to perfect a permit to do so.
Now, what committee is that again?
It is in criminal justice tomorrow. It's already gone through both iterations of civil. It was what they call double referred. In other words, what that means is they only give it every opportunity to get killed before it got to the floor. So we're going to take one more shot at it tomorrow. Do I hold out much hope that this is going to move forward? I do not. It is a thing that is necessary because it's constitutional across the board. Now, with TFA being what it is, we're a 501c4, and we've always, you know, we take the money that we bring in through events and from our membership and stuff, and we help good legislators, and we work against bad legislators. But how many years have we been doing this where we would champion guys and get them elected, and they'd go up there and they'd carry our bills, and then just like, oh, we're not going to let you go ahead and put that on notice. We're going to take it off notice for you, even though it's constitutional, even though it's time is right to do it, even though the Supreme Court has said that y'all don't have the power to do this. We can't get anybody in our General Assembly to get together. And what happens is 1 year it'll be the House that'll kill everything. The next year it'll be the Senate. And it just depends on who's in trouble and how many different people they got running against them as to how they do it. But I can remember when we ousted Deborah Maggart, what she told John and I was that, well, this is an election year. We don't want to put a Second Amendment issue up. It'll hurt us. And she was, at that time, the Republican caucus chair. She was the leader of the Republican Party. And what did it do? It got her unelected at that point because people got involved and they got up off of their dead rear ends and off their couches, and they gave us money, and we put up billboards, and we went up there and we talked about it, and then we knocked on doors and we defeated her. Courtney Rogers won that race, and she had no more business doing that than I do flying a jet airplane because she was not a political individual. She didn't know how to campaign. She had never been a politician before, but the people were so incensed that a person would tell them your rights don't matter. And
they're still telling us that.
We were able to take it. Listen, they piled a bunch of money into that race too. A lot of money because she was, I mean, the Speaker of the House was her best friend. I remember I got a picture somewhere on my computer of the two of them going over to Leather and Lace and, you know, taking their handgun permit classes. They was all for their Second Amendment butters.
Yeah.
All right.
So we got a bunch of them.
Yeah. Well, we don't call anybody that. What we do is we set up a set of rules for a club. It's kind of like my geometry teacher in high school. He'd say, I ain't going to call nobody a bird, but I'm going to write down the rules for a club. And if you want to join, that's entirely up to you. So if you ever make the statement, well, I support the Second Amendment, but you're a keynote member of that club, because there is no but to it.
Yep, absolutely.
What we've said, the Second Amendment simply says that a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, that's a prefatory clause. What it does, it describes what we're fixing to do, what we're talking about, okay? It's just basic English. But when it talks about regulation, does it say anything about regulating the second part?
No.
Or does it talk about the militia?
Militia.
And then they define it in Heller. What they say is to regulate the militia means they need to be practicing the use of their arms, and that the people would, when called upon to join the militia, bring the weapons that they had at home to militia duty. And what we wanted them to do was to be practicing their use, because if we had to call the militia out, it was going to be necessary that they be good with them. We ain't got time to train you once we call the militia out. And so Scalia and Heller just point blank says that the only thing it does is talk about being practiced in the use of. And we can't get these culls up there at the legislature to read that. Everybody went, well, it does say you can regulate guns. No, it doesn't. It says you can regulate the militia. You go look at what in Heller, it talks about a case from Georgia, Nunn v. State. And it basically says that every man, woman, and child can carry any kind of weapon they want, because when we call you out, we need you to be able to kill. Now, it's a lot longer than that. It says more, but that's exactly what it means. The whole point of dangerousness with the weapon, more people are killed with hands and feet every year than are killed with rifles in the United States. Do we license hands and feet? Do we want to, we got to ban fist because they can hurt people? That's not what we do. Each of us has a right to arms so that we can do three different things: to protect ourselves and the people that we love from crime, whether that be in the home or outside. Number two, to fight against an invasion if it occurs.
I mean, like what we got going on now?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if anybody doesn't think that we're being invaded, they got soft spots in their head, or they're complicit.
Yep.
And maybe a little of both most of the time. But against crime, because as it said in Heller, self-defense is the true palladium of liberty. And in any government that attempts to deny its citizens the ability to have arms for their protection, liberty, if not already dead, is on its deathbed. Now, it says that in Heller, but I don't hear the director of the TBI referencing that. And they go from Heller to McDonald to Catano to Bruin, and every one of them says it is understood, and we have found that the citizen has a right to have firearms in case of confrontation with another person.
Yep. If
that is in fact the right that we have, Justice Ginsburg is quoted in Heller saying those exact same things. That, the whole point of the Second Amendment is to carry a firearm in your clothes or on your person or in a pocket in case of confrontation with another. If Justice Ginsburg understood that, then why doesn't the Tennessee General Assembly understand that? You've got to know, and people poo-poo this when I say it, but it's true. It's a crime to carry any firearm in the state of Tennessee with the intent to go armed, which when you look at the legislative director for the Department of Safety in Senate Judiciary Committee last year, they asked her what that meant. She said, if it's loaded. So my question is what good is carrying a gun if it's not loaded? But if that's going to be her definition, then the intent to go armed is to carry a loaded weapon. You go back to Andrews v. State, and it says you've got the right to purchase them, to keep them in a state of efficiency for use, to keep them in repair, to buy and provide ammunition for them, and to carry them to and from your home. And the General Assembly should not be allowed to tell you can't do that without it being a violation of the Constitution. That's right there in that Supreme Court case, but I don't ever hear anybody referencing that in committee. Have you?
No, they seem to be determined to ignore that, and like I say, it's really that much more infuriating. Considering everything we have going on, and we have these laws, but that's not helping situations like Memphis, really Nashville or Knoxville for that matter, But especially if you look at what's going on in Memphis, I mean, what are the decent people that live in Memphis supposed to do? Just wait to call the police to come and, tape off the crime scene?
Well, if you saw what happened in Orange Mountain, if you saw the videos, the pictures were down there. I count 6 different AKs pointed to the sky being fired like it was Fallujah.
Mm-hmm.
And the police are doing nothing.
Yep.
They didn't arrest anybody. They didn't show up. If in fact that's what's going on, what keeps them from moving from that location out to the next one? People need to. I talked to a friend of mine from Memphis this last week. She's a lady that's a dental assistant. And she said, I used to think that you were crazy. She said, but I want you to know now that I have a firearm in every room in my house so that I don't have to go looking for one, because she lives in Memphis. And her husband is ex-military. And so he finally got her to understand that boy's not nuts. He's giving you good advice.
Yep.
And so if you can take a person who 5 years ago was virulently anti-gun to see what's going on in her neighborhood, in one of the nicer neighborhoods in Memphis, and now she's afraid to live in her own house. She's got, not like a lot of people have 1 or 2, she's got a gun in every room in her house. That speaks to me of the problem that we have in the state of Tennessee with our government, because understand this, they're not responsible for your safety or your security.
Right.
There is no statutory or constitutional charge that law enforcement or government of any type owes any duty whatsoever to protect you.
Yet they lobby against us being able to protect ourselves.
Every time. You go back and look, there's a video of, and I put it up on and let me plug right now if I can,
sure,
the YouTube channel for the Tennessee Firearms Association. If you'll go and look at that, and when it comes up, hit the videos tab, you will see there's a bunch of videos that we've done. And a lot of those are just simply taking the testimony of the legislators themselves and letting you see exactly what they said. But the committee chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Mike Bell, in 2021, when they were passing the governor's so-called constitutional carry, said, boys, I've been around here for a long time. And the people that fight against every removal of an infringement on the Second Amendment is law enforcement. The departments come in here, Department of Safety, the TBI, chiefs of police, the Sheriff's Association, every time said they fought against the permit system. And this year, you see them writing us saying, hey, the permit system's great, don't do away with that. But when we were trying to get the permits passed, they hated that. Well, there's going to be blood, and we're going to shoot each other over parking spots and loaves of bread. None of that's ever happened.
Except in Memphis, which was where it was already happening, right?
Well, yeah. But here's the thing. Good people are not your problem.
Right.
If you look at the percentage of crime committed by people with handgun carry permits in the state, it is infinitesimal. It's less than 1/1000th of 1%. And if that's in fact the case, then what do they fear with good people carrying firearms? And if they think that all these mandatory background checks and all these different bills that they're passing at the legislature right now and say, oh, well, if you do this, you can't buy a gun. If you do that, you can't buy a gun. What that means is you can't go to an FFL dealer and buy a gun there. That does not mean that you can't buy a gun, because I can guarantee if you want to go down to Orange Mountain, you got a little green, you can get just about anything you're looking for. So if you think that by passing a law, you're going to change a criminal's desire, you have to understand that criminals obey no laws. And it's kind of like Jeff Cooper says, that if you're going to stop crime, what you're going to have to do is realize that criminals do not fear the police, and they don't fear the courts, and they don't fear jail. If you want to stop crime, you're going to have to make them fear their victims.
Yep.
And that's the only thing that's going to change this absolute run-up of crime that we got, especially in Memphis, and Jackson's getting pretty bad. Yep. They don't put it on the news down here because you don't drive all people wanting to bring businesses in or move down here in some of these high-dollar homes. But Jackson's a dangerous place.
Yeah, and Clarksville's a lot worse than a lot of people know as well. Hey,
yeah.
Once again, I appreciate all you do, and thanks for anything else that we need to know. You need enough people. You need a good number of people to show up tomorrow for the committee meeting.
Yeah, we need.
What time is it?
It's at 9 o'clock, and it'll be in hearing room 1 of the House side.
And it's already passed the Senate, right?
No. Well, We don't know what's going to happen in the Senate right now. It actually moved out of Senate Judiciary, and when it went to Finance, it kind of got short-stopped, and they re-referred it back to the Senate Judiciary Committee, but that's closed. But we're trying to get the amendment that was put on stripped so that we can actually take it directly to the floor. And if it went to the floor in the Senate, it would absolutely pass, because they got a bunch of folks over there that's got challenges this year.
Yeah.
Every person that's got a race on the Senate Judiciary Committee has got a primary opponent. And so it's just like how they voted on that constitutional amendment.
Yeah.
They all voted for it. And then when it got to the floor, they all voted for it. So if we can get that booger to the floor, it'll pass. The heavy lift right now is going to be over in the House and see if we can get it through there.
Okay. Well, we're going to put your site up again one more time, Tennessee Firearms Association. Hey, guys, there's a lot of great information on here. And every week during session, the TFA puts out what's on the agenda for the upcoming week and the status of the bills, whether it's a pro-gun bill, an anti-gun bill, and they put a few other bills up there that they think are important. So it's really a great site. Hey, remember, Richard does all this on his own dime. He's not a paid lobbyist. This is not the little NRA, okay? This is TFA, a whole different ball game. And he goes up there and spends his vacation time, I won't say lobbying, fighting for your Second Amendment rights or your Section 26 rights in Tennessee. But hey, Richard, I appreciate it. I definitely have you back on, and I hope everything goes well tomorrow.
All right, I'll give you a report and let you know what happens.
All right, hey, thanks. Take care. Remember, if you're not instructing your state legislatures on important issues, they are still being instructed by feckless state leaders, the Chamber of Commerce, numerous lobbyists, and other well-heeled scum that roam the halls of the Capitol. And we've already recovered the issue, or talked about the issue out of Dyersburg. I want to thank everybody for taking time to watch our program tonight. Be sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons as well as the notification bell so that you never miss a show. The Tennessee Informer is also available to listen to as an audio podcast on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Spreaker, and other podcast platforms. Just do a search for the Tennessee Informer and you'll find all of our shows, or you can find them on our website, tninformer.com. While you're there, take a moment to sign up for the weekly newsletter to stay up to date. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter as well. Just search for @TNInformer. Share us with your friends. Tomorrow night, April 23rd, our guest will be Don Barnett, a fellow at the Center for Immigration Studies. He lives in Nashville. He just returned from our out-of-control border and will give us an update on who might be coming to Tennessee. Hope you will join us. That's it for now. Good night from Paris, Tennessee, that is.